So, welcome to the championship final of the 25th annual NIBS Worldwide Business Case Competition. My name is Nico Kubert and I'm the official timekeeper for this match. At this time, we ask you to turn off all cellular telephones and other mobile devices. As a courtesy to the presenters, please do not leave until both the presentation and the question and answer session are complete. Please note that recording of presentations is strictly prohibited except by competition organizers or representatives of the presenting team. The team presenting today is from Bishop's University. The presentation will last a maximum of 20 minutes. I will signal to the presenters when there are 10, 5, 3, and 1 minute left. The team members, please nod after seeing each sign to confirm that you have seen it. You must stop when I indicate that the time is up if you are not finished. After the presentation, the judging panel will have 10 minutes to ask questions. I will signal to the presenters and judges when there are 5, 3, and 1 minute left. Once again, you must stop when time is up, even if you are not finished. I now invite each member of our judging panel to introduce themselves. The team will then begin their presentation.
Hi guys, congrats on making it so far to the grand finale. I'm Maximilien Jacquemin, I'm from Belgium. I'm specialized in industrial automation and industrial vision systems, and here I will be the CSR manager.
Good afternoon, and indeed, congratulations on making it to the final. My name is Guus. I'm a former case competitor, and today I'll be your CFO. I wish you the best of luck.
Congratulations. My name is Bernd. I'm a data scientist working for marketing research, and today I'm responsible for HR.
I'm Christoph, working in an e-commerce company in Cologne, and today I will be Ren Zhengfei, the CEO and founder of Huawei.
Congrats as well. My name is Marcus Drescher. I'm from Heilbronn University and I will represent the audit department.
Hello, congratulations also from my side. My name is Caroline Knödler. I'm working at Mercedes and responsible for data analytics and AI. And for today, I'm responsible for marketing.
Well, good afternoon everybody. Huawei executives, thank you so much for taking the time. My name is Noah Jepson. This is Maxime Jacques, Kerry Poirier in Cecil Bélanger. And we are Argus Consulting. Now, your company's growth recently is extremely unprecedented, but very impressive, and that relies around your R&D powerhouse. You're always on the leading edge of technology, but technology isn't the only thing that you're on the leading edge of. Sustainability, as well as green initiatives, is something that you hold very dear to yourself, and that starts with your supply chain. And that's why today the mandate is how can your company effectively influence and change your supply chain operations to make sure it's as sustainable and green as possible. Some key considerations that we've taken into account, not only the supply chain, but the compliance, the network, and the performance of those operations. Our recommendation is take an old treat that you used to use, the BSFS, and revamp it to make it just a little bit better. Increase your communication and involvement with suppliers, and lastly, reduce your supplier base to make it just a little more consolidated.
Thank you, Noah. So now, just before going to our recommendation, we just want to outline some key industry success factors to understand what a company needs to be successful in the telecommunication industry. First one being product offering, so making sure that the product range suits customers' needs, and that innovation is at the forefront as well to be able to bring those new features that are required to keep up with the pace of change. Second being prices, because they're required to stay competitive, especially in the B2B segments. Third one being supply network management, so balancing the number of suppliers as well as ensuring their development helps controlling costs. And fourth, sustainability, which has recently been more and more important, so making sure that companies are compliant on issues such as working conditions, carbon footprint, and so on. So here we can really see that innovation, efficiency, and customer responsiveness are necessary to compete both on costs and differentiation in the industry. Now, when we look at some opportunities and threats that we've identified specifically for the sustainability issues that your company is facing, first of all is that we've seen an opportunity in local governments in China with putting pressure on companies. So they're not doing it quite well, and that is an opportunity that your company can leverage. Second one being that there are other issues that can be leveraged, talking about water pollution and food contamination. Now, of course, corporate image improvement is something that can be leveraged, especially because consumers are becoming more and more conscious of the environmental footprint and performance of companies. As well as we're looking here at JEC, so the partnership of telecommunication companies to improve compliance with environmental standards. And there's also the rise of auditing consulting services.
Now, there are a couple of threats to consider, and that one is the policies China's implementing on sustainability. And that's why you have to take a dive into the sustainability practices of your supply chain. Next would be the US-China trade tensions. Now, we're not going to dive too deep into this, but it is something to consider in the future because that is where you are selling your products. And of course, sustainability is something overall that we're going to capture here in this presentation. And this is something that is industry-wide that all your competitors are implementing.
So the key takeaway here really is you can see that governments, customers, and international organizations are actually putting pressure on telecommunication corporations to comply.
So now let's look where the forces of change are coming from. First, we're going to look at the rivalries. As I mentioned before, this is a heavy competitive industry with major players already making moves to be more sustainable. Next would be the suppliers. This is a weak force because you are so segregated with smaller and medium-sized enterprises, which you have a lot of influence over. And next would be these external pressures, as we mentioned before, which are the international corporations, the governments, as well as the society as a whole.
So now we're going to take a deeper dive into your company and look at the tools that you have in your toolbox. So first we'll go and look at your strengths. And I already mentioned the ability that you have in the R&D departments. But something that we really want to mention is your pressure and your influence on your supply chain, but as well in China itself. You're a huge player in the industry, and your relationship with the government is extremely important and something that you can use in the future. The key takeaway here is that your company has the capital resources and influence to really make a difference in terms of sustainability.
So now there are some areas of concern. The most important one is that you have a lot of suppliers, and this is because you need the capacity in order to meet that demand. But because you have such a high demand and you need that capacity, you have just small, and it just makes it harder to make sure that they follow the sustainable performance requirements that you want them to. So this makes it more difficult for you. And also is like for this, right now you have these events where you gather a lot of suppliers, which are about like 170 suppliers in this event, which is just a small fraction of the total amount. And these events are not as effective just for the simple reason is that this is looking at the suppliers at a large view and not looking at them more looking at them more personally and giving them the advice that would really help them. And the last one I want to address is really the high auditing costs, because right now, for each supplier, when you test, it's about like 90%, and this involves high costs, which increases your overall expenses. So the key takeaway here is that Huawei has many small and medium suppliers to meet their growing demand, consequently increasing the difficulty of incorporating sustainable operations throughout the supply chain.
So that was a mouthful, but I'm really going to break it down in this slide right here. And that's really the better future for the supplier forum. It's something that you've utilized in the past, and forums have actually worked to instill change. However, the change hasn't always been long-lasting. So we identify forums as something that we can use in the future. And we already gave you a sneak peek of our recommendation, where we're making better future for supplier forum number 2. But let's talk about the pitfalls of number 1. Number 1 was the inability to show quantifiable change. That was one reason why it was not deemed success. But the main takeaway here is actually, depending on the locations, there were many parts of local governments and local provinces that where these small and medium enterprises that weren't compliant were actually flying under the radar due to lack of oversight from that local government, regardless of what the federal level was saying from an institutional change point of view.
Now here's just a quick fact that we really want to put forward is that you can see that looking at your supplier base right now, 77% is fragmented. So your biggest supplier being Foxconn at 6.8% really shows that there's room for improvement to concentrate your supplier base and improve your efficiency in the supply network.
So now let's look at the financials of your company. Right now, as you can see, just with the revenues, they have increased over the last few years at a CAGR of around 17%, which is a good growth. And just the profits, we see that it has slightly decreased, it's been volatile, but it is not too bad. Like right now, it's just about like 8%, which is quite stable. And another point I want to point out is just the debt. Right now, your debt has decreased over the years. Just by looking at your interest, you have less obligations towards that. So if ever there is like if ever you do need the financing, that is a possible way to go if ever you do want to go for future projects. And the last thing I want to mention is the supplier per regions. It's really, right now, most of your supplies are within China, which is about like 40%. And this is a great amount, especially that these are the ones that do not really meet the like sustainable performance requirements.
Now we talked a lot about sustainability and the focus on what China has to do to become more sustainable. We've identified a few areas that you personally are really concerned about, and that is the employee focus, making sure these employees have a healthy and safe area to work in, as well as they're getting fair wages and not overexerting themselves with extraneous hours. And of course, the reduction of emissions with all the scopes 1, 2, and 3. And you've used your analysis tools to see the greatest impact being in your supply chain, and that is what the goal is, to improve the practices in the supply chain to lower the emissions.
Now let's bring it back to our mandate, which is today to see how you can improve your sustainability performance. Now we've identified 3 specific alternatives that could have been followed. The first one being BFSF 2.0. So this would require addressing BFSF initial failures, which Noah will cover a bit later on, as well as consolidating the number of suppliers that you have currently in China to have better control on your operations. It will also require using the sustainability assessment tool and developing a Chinese sustainability forum. If we look at the second alternative, so focusing on JAC, so improving efforts with JAC members for supply compliance and creating an in-house sustainability tool. The third one being backwards integration, which is vertical integration, so buying suppliers that you're purchasing electrical appliances, batteries, connectors, and other parts. Now, if we compare all of those options, we can see that if we go with BFSF 2.0, it is a developed structure for sustainability assessment. So it facilitates supplier compliance and it increases the motivation of suppliers to actually comply. And it improves relationships with all the stakeholders, so governments, international organizations. Now, the only con is that the results of the tools have yet to be proven, but we will really address how we can actually, scale up the quality of this tool. When we look at focusing on JAC, well, it strains away from your core competencies of developing a sustainability tool. It's timely as well. We might notice some resistance from JAC members and limited results as well. And finally, backwards integration. Well, in terms of feasibility, it's a bit harder, and it's a complex process and timely as well. So when we look at the 3 alternatives, looking at what would improve your sustainability performance, increasing motivation and compliance of your supplier base, as well as supply chain efficiency, securing contracts for the future, and balancing the needs of your stakeholders, we can see that the first option, so going with BFSF 2.0, is the way that your company should follow.
Thank you, Max. So we want to just take a little deeper dive, and at a very high level, BFSF 2.0 is really about communication, it's about compliance, and it's about making everything more sustainable, at least in your supply chain. So that's why, with the miscues of BFSS number 1, we want to make sure that we highlight those issues and remedy them for 2.0. So that starts, first of all, with problem number 1. Depending on the locations and the local governments, there was issues in compliance due to small SME suppliers flying under the radar of regulation. So the solution, create a Chinese telecom sustainability forum. There's many forums that are global between telecom producers, but there isn't one yet that specifically focuses on Chinese telecom and those suppliers. And with you being the largest provider in China, the missing piece is just the government connection. So that's why CTSF is going to be a forum between the government, between your company and other telecom companies and those suppliers to really make a regulated and standardized level for supplier code of conduct, as well as many other things. So first, here are the goals: to create that unified code of conduct, but also reduce the number of risky suppliers that you have by around 20% due to them not being able to meet those standards. One of the reasons here that the government would actually want to come in and sit on this forum is because creating a more sustainable supply chain for their largest and most important telecom company is a win-win situation for both sides. The internal and external factors that we're leveraging are listed right there, but the key takeaway is the consolidation of pressure on these small and medium-sized enterprises to make meaningful and impactful change. Now moving into the second issue. Some SMEs don't have the capabilities to really invest in these solutions. They're too small or they don't have the resources. Solution, green loan application, and a selection program for you to actually select which suppliers, the importance of those suppliers, and exactly how are they going to remedy any kind of anti-sustainability practices that they currently are operating. Application progress and the amounts are relatively small, and as Kelly mentioned, you do have the financial backing and the capital requirements to actually facilitate a program like this. The goals coming out of this implementation will be to help suppliers finance more eco-friendly and sustainable practices, specifically in their operational fields, but also tie these green loan programs to the supplier contract to really focus on the duality of the relationship. Key takeaway here is to incentivize these suppliers and give them an avenue for making sustainable practices and operations that maybe weren't realizable before.
So now let's look at how it will impact your overall operations. Because right now you use a lot of audit procedures, but we are recommending that you go towards the program in order to get the data. So with this, it will be a slow transition because you have to test the program to see if it actually provides the accurate information and to make the necessary adjustment. But over time, this will lead to a lot of cost savings because you will be reducing that number of audits that you make, which are quite expensive because it's like around 1,000 per audit per day. So that adds up pretty quickly, especially that some audits can take about like 10 days depending on which company it is. So there are a lot of cost savings, but these cost savings that you have from the audits can be reinvested into the evaluation of the data because you will be gathering data from the, let's say from the program as well as the audit. So the main goal is that you basically look at what the program tells you, whether the supplier was risky or not, and then you compare it to the audit results and see the accuracy of everything. So just with this, there will be like evaluation costs which will be necessary to pay, and it's really that you want to make sure that you have this little transition from going like mostly audit to more to a program automated system. So now let's look at how you will decrease the number of suppliers. Because as I mentioned before, right now you have a lot of suppliers, but this is because that they don't have the capacity to meet that demand. But what we are recommending is that you try to reduce that number, but go for those bigger companies who have that capacity. So by going with these bigger players, they will be able to meet your demand, and it's less management for you, especially for them to meet your sustainable performance requirements. So how we will evaluate this is that the first thing is to look at is that whether they meet the sustainable performance requirements. This is really important to look at, and whether they are efficient or not. So do they meet the time delays that you ask them? Do they actually fill in the order? As well as do they comply to the applicable Chinese laws and codes? And finally, you want to make sure that you don't keep just the smallest competitors, because this is just a lot more to manage, so it's better just to keep the ones with the bigger ones. And the objective by this is to decrease the number of suppliers by around like 15%. This seems to be this is a conservative number, because for sure the first years we have to see how it all turns out, if it is possible, but we do believe this is a feasible number. And just for, yeah.
So when we look at putting in place a supplier development program, what we look here is that focusing on certain areas of sustainability, so carbon footprint, labor practices, health and safety, waste management, child labor, and so on. So we have set specific targets for this that are located in the appendix, but really it's about the process improvement and auditors. So auditors would help suppliers to get certifications and meet standards that are revolving around your current standards of sustainability. And in terms of process improvement, well, using the Chinese sustainability forum as a way to share process improvement ideas is a way that you can actually help your suppliers develop and then expand their production capacities that can actually meet the demand that you are giving them, as well as making sure that you are able to shrink your supplier base in terms of the numbers.
Now let's look at how this implementation will affect your marketing. As you can tell, this is more of a supplier-based strategy we suggest to you, but it does affect the marketing in a couple ways, and that is by improving your sustainability image globally. This overall will affect will increase your sales, as well as it will be spread through news coverage, through newspapers, as well as television coverage. And as mentioned before, it will increase your sales as well as improve your global image. Now, diving into the timeline, we can see that restructuring the supplier base and analyzing which are the high emission suppliers and targeting them first with this implementation strategy, and developing a sustainable plan with these suppliers, because we recognize that that was one of the borderline issues, is that they felt that you were coming in and imposing these sustainable practices and not developing a plan with them. So by implementing this strategy, you'll feel like they're better recognized and you have more adoption from these suppliers. And as you can see, we suggest you consolidate pressure right off the bat and evaluate this process yearly.
So now let's look at the financials and how it will impact. So the first thing is, this recommendation is really more related to the expenses. It will not generate revenue, but this is just something so that it helps to meet those sustainable performance requirements that you want your suppliers to meet. So there will be audit fees. For sure they are quite high, but overall we are expecting them to decrease over the next few years. Even this is just like a short-term period, but in the long run they will decrease. And then there's the evaluation cost and then the internal audit, where this is more people from your company who will go look at the suppliers and see whether they are using, let's say, well, if ever they use a credit loan, if they are using it appropriately. So it's just making that little, making sure that everything is okay and it is used. And there's a bit of marketing. So these costs, these seem quite high, but when we look at how it really impacts your overall margins, it only decreases like around 6 million. And right now, your margins are in the billions. So this does not have a huge impact, and you do have the finances to invest in this.
And looking into our risk mitigations, of course, the highest risk with the biggest impact and the highest probability is the supply resistance, but that is why we implement a strategy that focuses completely on mitigating that risk.
So now, as we start to wrap it up here are some outcomes that we just want to implement and give you so you can check in on the procedure as the implementation goes on. First is increasing supplier compliance, and that's really going to be focused around working with them at those forums. But reducing emissions in the Tier 1 and the Tier 2, as well as the Tier 3 sections, are key objectives, and those are ones that you'll be able to market to the external environment. And lastly, to reduce your supplier number by around...
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Thank you, team, judges. The presentation was 20 minutes long. You now have 10 minutes for the question and answer period.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, guys. So I'd like to stay on that slide actually, because you talk about consolidating suppliers, so you want to reduce by 20% the number of suppliers that we have. I'm quite concerned about the rationale behind it. I mean, I understand the reason why you want to do it. The only thing is, what if one of our suppliers is resistant to change, but that we are highly dependent on it? What is then your mitigation for that? Should we still drop him, and what's the solution then?
That is an excellent question. Can we go back to mitigation? So we've analyzed a series of criteria to select certain suppliers, but our mitigative risk is if the suppliers do not wish to follow these standards, is to either enforce this through the pressures or outsource that to another geographic location that specializes in that product.
What would be, if I ask you, the one key success factor of your suggestion, what we are not doing right now?
Right now is currently communicating with those suppliers. The issue is that you've imposed regulation on these suppliers without properly asking them and informing them on what their best practices are. And so facilitating a conversation with the suppliers, additionally with the government, is really going to make everything flow just a little bit easier.
So the original BFSF was a joint approach of different ICT companies. You are now suggesting that we would be better off by setting up BSF, you know what I mean, 2.0, without any other company supporting us. Why do you think this will be more successful?
So it's really a shift, because before BFSF was more of a, as you said, a joint partnership. This is specifically in China, and it's not a one company thing. It's not a program only for Huawei. includes the suppliers as well as the government.
What if, as I understand, the forum that you want to set up is a major pillar of that strategy. So what if the suppliers won't enter it? Because in the past, there were a lot of initiatives and they were reluctant to comply.
So you're currently already having forums and meetings with your suppliers, and this is a way for them to get their voice heard. Hopefully, initially, you're able to market the benefits of the green loans, of being part of the process of making these regulations, and if that's not a benefit enough to them, then that is a big concern from them, from a supplier point of view.
So your answer is hope. So what if that is not becoming true?
Well, then they are just one less supplier being part of having their voice heard in that agreement. And so what ends up happening is you have, hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers. One doesn't want to show up. They just don't get a piece of the pie.
How will you measure that you are successful?
That's a very good question. So if you go to the first appendix, so here we can really see different targets that we've identified. So looking at emission reduction, so we would really put some targets for your suppliers. So tier 1, tier 2, 90% by 2030, and tier 3, 30% by 2030. Now also other areas, so compliance to hazardous waste, certification, we would require that they have at least one certification that is related to environmental standards. In terms of example, also child labor, zero tolerance policy. So those are really key focus areas, key targets that those suppliers should meet to be able to remain in your supplier network.
So you're planning on cutting out on auditing. Auditing is the only real control that we have and the only thing that has actually been proven. Why would we cut out on auditing after you concluded that we have enough free cash flow?
Well, I think you misunderstood what I meant. It's we're not cutting auditing fully. What we're trying to do is that we're cutting it just like a small percentage of it, so just relying less on this because it is costly. So if ever it's trying to transition from auditing to more of a program that works, but this is done gradually. So the first years you will still have a lot of those auditing costs, but they will decrease overall in the next few years.
Thank you, but as you understood in the case, our goal is not to decrease auditing, it's to scale it up and to make it more feasible. So isn't that exactly the opposite of what we want to do, what you're suggesting us?
That's a good point. So we suggest that you use technology to make it more efficient. So it's not taking out the auditing process altogether, it's adapting technology to make it more efficient so you can analyze which companies are following the performance standards that you have set, as well as working with them more closely to ensure that they have the resources and capabilities to do so.
If I can add on top of that, so we're not reducing the number of suppliers that are being audited, we're just reducing the frequency to make it more efficient with the solutions we're putting in place.
A lot of our suppliers have a really close tie to the government. The new kind of forum, can it be that we are just in between the chairs?
So a lot of the suppliers do have connections, but there is pressure from the federal government. It's the localized government. There is a lack of presence. They are not enforcing it as much as the federal government is. But so by being and consolidating the stages of government as well as all the international corporations, we feel that is the best way to add more pressure onto the suppliers to adapt the sustainable practices.
So you're suggesting to combine the setup of the new forum with government and our suppliers, combine that with consolidation of our suppliers. Why do you think that combination makes sense? Why should we consider consolidating the suppliers at all?
Well, we suggested that because there are a lot of suppliers that do not view sustainability as a main priority, which goes against your values. And as far as the value chain that you add to your consumer, it doesn't just start with the end product. It goes all throughout the value chain, which includes the suppliers. So that's why we suggested consolidating a few of them into a larger players, so that way you're not dependent on a lot of small suppliers that in a way kind of manipulated the system because there is no regulations imposed on it, enforcement.
Thank you. As a CSR manager, I also want to see how our suppliers engage with us. And one of the little carrots that you gave for our suppliers is basically a bonus of $200,000. Is that correct? Short, yes or no?
No.
Okay, then can you elaborate on that?
Of course. So what it is, it's a green loan, and so pretty much it's a low interest loan to help suppliers that don't have the resources or capabilities to put in place green and sustainable operations to do so.
Right, then I'm going to ask another question, which is, as you've seen, we have several suppliers which have a market capitalization of several $1 billion. Do you think a $200,000 loan is going to motivate them to make a big transformation in their company?
So you have a wide array of suppliers that range in different market caps. The ones that are smaller are the ones that we've identified as a first need to move into more sustainable practices. They're the ones that don't have the resources. So that's all the way on the left of the exhibit that you provided to us.
Regarding your investment costs that we see over time, so what exactly is related to those costs? Can you elaborate on that?
So this is just like a detail of all the costs that was in the budget. So you have the auditing cost, which you can see that the average is around $1,000, and then you have the average days required, which is 10. And you can just see that it kind of gives you around 4 million, and then it kind of decreases a bit just because we do believe you will have less suppliers over time, but you will have the big suppliers instead. So then after there will be internal auditing, there's the checkup, and then it's just having a bit of marketing, other costs related to all of this kind of recommendation.
Yeah, so I had a little question about this government connection, the CTSF. So most of our suppliers are considered red capitalists and they don't want to change. Why are suppliers signing for this CTSF? Do you think?
So the government has a role in the sustainability of your supply chain, and as I mentioned, your company is extremely important to not only Telecom in China, but it's the large manufacturing chain behind your company. So they don't want to change, but that's why adding in the government, because since the government are really the only players that can make them change, adding in the government into the mix will actually allow for more standardization.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Time is up. Of the Network of International Business Schools and Narbonne University of Applied Sciences. Thank you for attending today's presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you again.